after hearing the scriptures this morning, are you feeling significantly shocked? The text from Judges is most certainly about war and most certainly comments on God's orchestrating it. First, a history lesson. This part of the Bible, the time of the Judges, is a period of around 450 years, beginning after Joshua's death, circa 1200 BCE. As Israel moved into Canaan, there was little interference by any strong powers from outside, like Egypt or Mesopotamia. That would later be the empires of Babylon, Assyria, Persia, and Rome. Israel faced new nations forming in the Transjordan, raiders from the Arabian desert, Canaanite city-states, and the newly arrived Philistines along the Mediterranean Sea. Conflict was localized, growing from tribal jealousies. Israel was a confederacy of 12 tribes, loosely organized and held together by a common basis of worship and social responsibility, held together by their forebears and their shared covenant with God. They would meet in the Confederate sanctuary in Shiloh, and in times of crisis rise together in action in the name of the God of the covenant. For the most part, tribes did their own thing, each having their own local chieftains or family heads. It was also the period of judges. A judge was a non-hereditary position given to one upon whom rested a special charisma, an endowment of Yahweh's, God's Spirit. Authority of the person was recognized by the clan and by surrounding tribes. People of the clans visited judges for mediating legal disputes. The judges applied covenant law to people's lives and interpreted the law for specific cases. The judge introduced to us this morning is Deborah. Deborah, a charismatic leader who in the name of the covenant God corralled the tribal confederacy to go into battle against the Canaanites. This battle has religious meaning. The Bible text in Judges describes that it was God who led the army out into the theater of war and gave victory by intervening via thunderstorm. The battle was so epic that even the stars joined the battle. Historic and momentous, the battle is recorded in Judges 5 as an epic song with victory praise going to the God of Israel. As empires rise on all sides, Israel's tribal confederacy faced pressure. Tribes asked for a king so that they might be like other nations. This was a shift in understanding and practice. It would mean that tribes were no longer united by a common devotion to God and the covenant, or necessarily share a common worship and social responsibility. The tribes wanted a centralized government, where the government was what held common identity. Faith survived this change in understanding. Beyond the confederacy, the voice of God in the charisma of the judges was then expressed through the prophetic tradition, where God spoke to the king or kings through a prophet who reminded them and called them back to the covenant, a covenant of relationship in worship and social responsibility. Move ahead 2,500 years or so. Explorers set out to discover lands flowing with milk and honey, to take what land was discovered in the name of God and in the name of country. Arriving in the Americas, settlers found tribal confederacies and peoples, and in the name of God pushed people off their land, set tribes against each other, instigated war, bought and used people to fight the other settlers who were also claiming the land in the name of God and country. War is recorded in the Bible because war has always been a part of human experience. And God, being a part of human experience and understanding, has been placed right alongside the tellers of the tale, right into the heart of the war. War conversation in the Bible upsets us because we want to believe that God is better than that, better than the role humans have written God into. It comes down to ourselves. The war stories upset us because we want to believe that we are better than that. It would be unfortunate to leave the conversation overshadowed with the human preoccupation on and proclivity to war. The idea of the judges is worth taking a moment to understand. Setting society up with a system of judges rather than kings was God's idea of doing something different, having people purposefully live differently so as not to be like other nations. The focus was applying the law of the covenant, relationship with God and with others. The idea of judges was to show that there were options when facing conflict. For instance, that conflict could be resolved without violence, without bearing arms, without going to war. That through a covenant mediator, a judge, people could embrace reconciliation, reparation, restorative justice, renewed relationship, that there could be negotiation, even collaboration. A second history lesson. Canada just marked Remembrance Day, where we take time to remember and to reflect on war. Martin Luther wrote, "War is the greatest plague that can affect humanity. It destroys religion. It destroys states. It destroys families. Any scourge is preferable to it." In World War II, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, that's the Lutheran Church in Germany, shook hands with Hitler. Churches were places of flags, banners, and propaganda. And at the same time, behind the scenes, churches participated in the underground transporting of people, Jews in particular, to get out. Churches towed the party line, hosting state dignitaries and being visibly present and supportive of the right in public political gatherings. There were churches who stepped out, sending their pastors to universities abroad to teach, but really to let the pastors tell the truth about what was happening. Some pastors were chosen by the government to go abroad and be spies for the authorities, to do it and send back information. Failure to do so would mean death to them or their families. Some pastors remained in the safety of North American university life, while others went back to Germany to be with their people. Lutheran pastor Bonhoeffer, who started an illegal seminary outside of the church of the day, was active in attempts to assassinate Hitler. In the Canadian experience of figuring out what to do, who to be during World War II, we created internment camps for Japanese Canadians, gave Black and First Nations people more rights as soldiers than they had as citizens. German Lutheran congregations gave up their language so as not to be associated with their country of origin. Lutheran pastors were tarred and feathered in small-town Ontario. Conscription caused heated conflict between English and French Canada. Some chose not to fight, to stand as conscientious objectors, like the Mennonites, the Seventh-day Adventists, Quakers, on the grounds of faith. As the war came to an end, the Lutheran Church in Canada reached out to displaced persons of Europe, Germans and Eastern Europeans, forming Canada Lutheran World Relief, to open the homes of Lutherans in Canada to those refugeed by war. The history lesson of the Lutheran Church and people of faith in World War II illustrates a myriad of options, without any one option being wholly acceptable or wholly flawed. The church, faithful communities, individuals were thrown into the theater of war, having to make choices quickly in the midst of change. How does one make such choices and understand or see all of the options? How does one faithfully weigh conscience, beliefs, acceptable actions, duty, social responsibility, and remain able to say one's prayers at night? This is why the Bible contains stories that make us uncomfortable, why we read of people's experiences and how they interpret God in them, around them, and through them, so that we might have the chance to reflect should we one day have to make such choices. and we hear it in community so that we might have conversation and reflection together. In the 1980s, the church went through a period where an effort was made to clean up what was heard in church. The readings for today would totally have been expunged, out the door with other great stories of lions and fiery furnaces and children being eaten by bears. Yes, that happens in 2 Kings. All to focus on the feel-good, happy stories. However, as you've heard me preach before, those very terrible stories to the parent of the 1980s were the very stories that placed a framework within a child's brain. When someone has a framework, a black and white story implanted of good and evil at a young age, as one grows and starts to question because of circumstances faced in life, then the story can change, be added to, taken away from, questioned, thought about, gain more dimension, and turn gray. That's what's happening with the adult story that we hear today. All this talk of war is a reflection of the human condition. And instead of sweeping it under the rug, people of faith are being asked to wrestle with war, faith, relationship with other people, solving conflict, violence, and where does God fit into all of this? I have no answers for you this morning, outside of why I feel that such texts are included in the Bible. I don't know what I would do in a time of war. I certainly have taken time to reflect on it and have much more reflecting to do. I've heard many stories from faithful people who have experienced war, who interpret God being active and a part of the experience, right there beside them. God in present, in escaping, in hiding, in fighting, in offering mercy, or being shown mercy. I would like to believe that those holy conversations, that my relationships with you and our talks about how God is and how we are to be in the world, that our connection to the God of the covenant, our common worship and social responsibility is so much a part of me and who I am, that any choice I make, options I look for, are made, trusting in this collective wisdom. God, involved in the human condition, when confronted with conflict, may we have courage to seek options without violence or war. When war is at our door and there are no choices that are acceptable, be at our side, and let collective wisdom be our guide. Amen.